Summer's calling, and shackshop.us has you covered. Dive into hot sales on lady swimsuits, sleek, stylish, and perfect for pool or beach. Stay connected and on trend with smartwatches that track your every move. Explore the depths with underwater drones and reach new heights with our flying drones. Adventure starts here. Hurry, these deals won't last. Shop now at shackshop.us and make this season unforgettable. Shackshop.us, where adventure meets style.
The global energy system is once again at the center of geopolitical conflict. Tensions in the Middle East escalated dramatically after Iran announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but critically important maritime corridor through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply flows. The declaration immediately rattled global markets, alarmed shipping companies, and triggered a wave of military and diplomatic responses from Western powers and regional allies. The move represents far more than a regional dispute. Analysts say it could mark the beginning of a new phase in the global economic confrontation surrounding sanctions, oil supply chains, and the so-called shadow fleet of oil tankers used to circumvent international restrictions. If the situation persists, the consequences could ripple across the world economy. Russia's ability to finance its war in Ukraine may be constrained, China's energy security could face new challenges, and global oil prices could surge. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is not just about oil tankers and naval patrols. It is about the future of the global sanctions system, the resilience of illicit energy networks, and the strategic competition between Western powers and an emerging bloc of countries seeking to bypass economic pressure. The strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically significant waterways on the planet. Located between Iran and Oman, the narrow channel connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide, yet it carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. Every day, massive tankers carrying crude oil and liquefied natural gas pass through the strait on their way to markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, and Kuwait rely on the passage to export their energy resources. Because of its importance, any disruption immediately sends shockwaves through the global economy. Iran has periodically threatened to close the strait during past confrontations with the United States and its allies. However, analysts note that the latest announcement comes at a particularly volatile moment, when sanctions enforcement is intensifying and geopolitical rivalries are escalating. Shipping companies reacted quickly. Reports indicated that tanker traffic through the region dropped sharply as crews and insurers evaluated the risks of missile strikes, drone attacks, or naval confrontations. For many shipping firms, the cost of sending a vessel through a war zone simply outweighs the potential profits. The shadow fleet, sanctions evasion on the high seas. At the center of the current crisis lies a complex network of ships often referred to as the shadow fleet. This fleet consists of hundreds of oil tankers operating outside traditional regulatory systems. Many sail under obscure or constantly changing flags, switch off their tracking transponders, or transfer oil between vessels at sea to disguise the origin of their cargo. These ships have become essential tools for countries facing international sanctions. Iran, Russia, and Venezuela have all relied on such networks to continue exporting oil despite restrictions imposed by Western governments. In many cases, these ships operate through shell companies and complicated ownership structures designed to obscure their true operators. Some vessels are decades old and purchased cheaply for the sole purpose of transporting sanctioned crude. The shadow fleet has grown dramatically in recent years, particularly after Western countries imposed price caps and sanctions on Russian oil following the invasion of Ukraine. Energy analysts estimate that hundreds of tankers are now involved in these clandestine operations. While the ships themselves may appear ordinary, the network behind them represents a sophisticated system of financial transactions, insurance arrangements, and logistical planning designed to evade sanctions. Western crackdown intensifies. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has coincided with an intensifying Western campaign against these shadow shipping networks. Governments across Europe and North America have begun targeting tankers, financial intermediaries, and shipping companies suspected of participating in illicit oil trade. One recent example occurred in the North Sea when Belgian authorities intercepted a tanker identified as part of the shadow fleet. The vessel, known as the MT Athira, was reportedly redirected to the port of Zeebrugge under escort by Belgian forces. Officials indicated that the ship would be seized as part of a broader sanctions enforcement effort. Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken praised the operation, describing it as an example of coordinated action against illicit energy trafficking. Investigations suggest that the vessel may have been linked to individuals associated with Iran's political leadership. If confirmed, the case would highlight how closely intertwined shadow fleet operations can be with political and military power structures inside sanctioned states. Western officials argue that these operations are necessary to prevent sanctioned regimes from generating revenue that could fund military activities or weapons development. Russia's war economy under pressure. For Russia, the stakes are particularly high. Since the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian government has relied heavily on oil exports to sustain its wartime economy.
Energy sales remain one of Moscow's primary sources of revenue, even as Western sanctions have attempted to restrict its access to international markets. To address this challenge, Russia has developed its own shadow fleet. Many of these vessels operate outside traditional Western insurance systems and transport crude oil to buyers willing to purchase it at discounted prices. China and India have emerged as major customers for these shipments. However, the recent tightening of sanctions enforcement could disrupt these flows. Western countries have implemented a price cap on Russian oil, limiting the price at which it can be sold if Western services such as shipping insurance or financing are involved. The cap was recently reduced to approximately $44 per barrel for Urals crude, Russia's primary export grade. If enforcement becomes more aggressive, Moscow could find it increasingly difficult to sell its oil without relying entirely on shadow shipping networks. Analysts say this could reduce the revenue available to fund the war effort in Ukraine. China is another major player in the unfolding energy crisis. As the world's largest importer of crude oil, China relies heavily on maritime energy supply routes. A significant portion of these imports passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Disruptions in the region could therefore have serious consequences for China's economy. In recent years, Chinese refiners have also become major buyers of discounted oil from sanctioned countries, including Iran and Russia. These purchases provide Beijing with cheaper energy supplies while offering sanctioned exporters a crucial lifeline. However, increased enforcement against shadow fleets could complicate this arrangement. If fewer ships are available to transport sanctioned crude, the flow of oil to Chinese refiners could slow. Some analysts warn that this could eventually push up energy costs within China, potentially affecting manufacturing and industrial output. Given China's central role in global supply chains, any disruption to its energy supply could have worldwide economic implications.
Military escalation in the region. The situation has also taken on a military dimension. Reports indicate that U.S. forces have targeted vessels suspected of supporting Iranian military operations. According to military officials, several Iranian-linked ships capable of launching drones or missiles have been struck during the ongoing campaign. In one reported incident, a large Iranian drone carrier vessel was hit by U.S. forces and left burning at sea. Officials suggested that the ship had been used to coordinate drone operations targeting shipping lanes. If accurate, the attack would mark a significant escalation in the maritime confrontation between Iran and Western forces. Military analysts say the destruction of such vessels could disrupt Iran's ability to project power in the region. However, it could also increase the risk of retaliation and further escalation. The economic ripple effects. Beyond the military and geopolitical implications, the crisis has the potential to affect everyday consumers around the world. Oil prices are highly sensitive to disruptions in supply routes. If shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains restricted, global energy prices could rise significantly. Higher oil prices typically translate into increased costs for transportation, manufacturing, and consumer goods. In the United States, this could mean higher gasoline prices. In Europe and Asia, industries reliant on energy-intensive production processes could face higher operating costs. Inflationary pressures could therefore intensify, particularly if the crisis persists for an extended period. Sanctions, oil, and the future of the global economy. The confrontation surrounding the shadow fleet represents a broader struggle over the effectiveness of economic sanctions. For decades, sanctions have been one of the primary tools used by Western governments to influence the behavior of rival states. However, the emergence of shadow shipping networks demonstrate how sanctioned countries can adapt. By creating alternative systems for transporting and selling oil, they have managed to maintain revenue streams even under heavy economic pressure. The current crackdown suggests that Western governments are determined to close those loopholes. Whether they succeed remains uncertain. The effectiveness of sanctions often depends on international cooperation, enforcement capabilities, and the willingness of buyers to participate. The risk of a wider energy crisis. If the Strait of Hormuz remains closed or heavily restricted, the world could face one of the most serious energy disruptions in decades. Even temporary interruptions in shipping could cause price spikes. Insurance rates for tankers could soar, making it prohibitively expensive to transport oil through the region. Some producers may attempt to reroute shipments through alternative pipelines or ports, but these options are limited. As a result, global energy markets could experience prolonged volatility. Conclusion: a critical moment for global energy security. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the growing crackdown on shadow fleet operations represent a turning point in the global energy and sanctions conflict. For Iran, the move signals a willingness to use its geographic leverage in response to mounting pressure. For Russia, the disruption threatens a key source of revenue used to sustain its war effort. For China, the crisis highlights vulnerabilities in its energy supply chains. And for the rest of the world, the situation underscores how quickly geopolitical tensions can destabilize the global economy.
The coming weeks will determine whether diplomacy can ease tensions or whether the confrontation will escalate into a broader energy crisis. What is clear is that the battle over oil, sanctions, and maritime power is entering a new and potentially dangerous phase.